Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Yeah, there we go. Right, Sophie, Caroline, the two directors, amazing.
I'm producer.
Oh, producer, sorry.
The director.
Director, producer. Yeah, amazing. Well done. Congratulations. Last night was the premiere of it. What was the feedback? How, what was the perception of everyone's who was watching it?
This is a film that took us 6 years to make, and I think something probably everyone in this room is familiar with is that feeling of really, really wanting to get a message out and change minds and have people see it, and this is our kind of love letter to the epilepsy community and to trying to push forward change and impact in some way that we can, and it was surreal actually having it on a big screen, and I think watching it impact people and realizing that obviously epilepsy was our focus in some ways, but the wider issues is relatable, and that was the point of the film, was that this isn't just a cause that relates to epilepsy. This is a story about having a family member who's in pain or trying to help someone and not being able to, and sisterhood and medical injustices and all those themes. So I think the really beautiful thing that came out of it actually was seeing how people interpreted it for themselves, and it touched something in them, and I think that was such a gift to be able to do as a filmmaker.
Sophie, how did you come about this? What inspired you to get involved into Chelsea's story, Tasman's story?
So I was introduced to Chelsea by Caroline, and I was brought on as a producer when they were sort of working out what the project would be. And Chelsea was a kind of cannabis activist and epilepsy activist. And we just realized that there was so many people in a position who weren't able to access this medicine, and what was the best way to get the message out there was to create a film and hopefully get as many people to watch it as possible and try to impact policy and things like that. And yeah, that's why I got involved.
So the takeaway from just watching it, it's twice I've watched it now, but it's about epilepsy. And I think generally, so when my son was first diagnosed, as we just spoke about, I just thought it'd be a couple of tablets and that's it, because everyone I knew who had epilepsy or at school were absolutely fine. They're totally normal. They lived a normal life. Whereas actually refractory epilepsy is totally different. It's devastating for the whole family. So how did the experience of doing the documentary, how did you find that? The impact on yourselves as well, just seeing the impact of the family.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because we could have gone a lot of ways with the film, and for us, we did start out, we were filming around November 2018 when everything changed, and we were close with a lot of the frontline activists at the time, the mothers of children, Hannah Deacon and Billy Caldwell's mum Charlotte, and it was tricky because we really wanted to tell the story of what was going on in the cannabis industry, and it was frustrating, but at the same time, when we got into the edit room, we were just looking at the footage and we were asking ourselves, what is the best way to connect with people about this? And there are brilliant, brilliant films about the history of drug prohibition and what's going on in cannabis, and I think what we felt like was the unique angle that we had was this feeling of stigma, that's something that kind of joins up both the activism movement more widely around cannabis and cannabis as a medicine, but also, you talked about your friends at school who have epilepsy, right? They can appear like they're living a normal life, but I think the thing that was quite shocking to witness was that it's like this shadow, this demon behind you all the time, as she talks about, that you never know when it's coming, and this feeling, this weighty feeling of, will I be okay, and fear, and I think that for us only actually put a very human element behind the wider cause that we wanted to talk about and show the real impact that it had on people. And so making the film was challenging because it was very emotional. And the last scene, I remember Sophie and I actually had one of our few, almost an argument, because we were there, and do you remember Tamsin was having a seizure, and Sophie is one of the kindest and most empathetic people I know, and she just naturally wanted to run in and help Tamsin, who was having a seizure, and I, as the filmmaker, was like, you cannot get in, we have to be able to show this. But that was the kind of thing that we had to face a lot, was wanting as people to be involved in these people we care about and we love and we still are so close to and fighting for, and then also having to take a more objective stance of how do we make sure we can show this the best way possible. And so it was very emotional.
That kind of leads on nicely to what the impact on Tamsin's family, from Chelsea, on mum and dad, etc. What is the impact you saw on the whole family?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. I think they have had, a very challenging set of circumstances, and there's only so many ways you can deal with that. But the best thing that's come out of it is the amount of love that is there. However, they are, they because of all the stigma, they, kind of want to keep that stuff in the shadows, and now it's been brought out in a film, and in many ways it was very cathartic for them. But for Chelsea, I was saying that she wanted to make a film about really just campaigning around the world for people getting access to cannabis and, shining a light on what an incredible medicine it is. But actually, as we, got through the process of filmmaking, we realized that the more compelling story and the better way to tell, show an audience how effective this medicine can be was to focus on the story of the sisters, which for Chelsea was, a very daunting prospect. So having to convince her that that was something that audiences would hopefully resonate with, which I think people are, convincing her that that was the right way to tell the story it really was an uphill battle for a long time. And she came around to it, and she's happy with the film, but that was, it's so personal for her and her family.
So through the whole process, what have you come to understand about why, especially in Tamsin's situation, access to unlicensed cannabis medicines has been so difficult to obtain? What have you seen as the barriers?
Yeah. So I had a conversation this morning, actually, with a neurologist. It's, as I said, it's been a while since we made the film, so I checked in with him, Guy, and I said to him, how would you answer this question? And he said, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There isn't the evidence. Obviously, it really pissed me off. But I think that the reality is, I look around at, actually, you can extrapolate out to conflicts going on in this, the wider world that we live in, and I think there's such an intuition to lean out and speak in an echo chamber and find the people who agree with you and really stick with them. And actually, it's just, that's not the way. I think, one of the reasons that she doesn't have it right now is because their family can't afford to take her out of full-time care with the NHS. This is one of the few places that looks after her, and when you're under the full-time care of the NHS and the neurologist, they're going to do what they think is best, or you lose your place there, right? So that's one challenge, is what is the best scenario for her? But I think the wider issue is that it's about, as a group of people who actually do know the facts and who are on the front line and who really care about this getting into hands of people, I think it's about leaning in, leaning into the people who aren't convinced and finding out how could they be convinced. Is it more clinical trials? Is it more real-world evidence? There are some people who'll never be convinced. I think you find that anyway. There are people who, they have their, they plant their flag in the sand, and that's where they're at. But I think, again, this is a question of stigma, and we're fighting hundreds of years. Well, no, I'll go back. We're fighting 100 years or so of stigma, right? Drug prohibition and the legacy of that, ironically from the States, who are now more progressive than us, is still lingering in a dark shadow on progress for patients. So it's a tough one, and Chelsea's comment at the end when she says parents will make poor decisions, I think, to clarify what she means, I think that's about the fact that no parent should have to be pushed to go to the black market to find a medicine for their child, and particularly if it's a medicine. This is not an adult who's I found that it really helps with my pain if I self-administer for myself, which is fine. Like, do that. You're an adult, make a choice, and if it works for you, fantastic. You know, obviously, I completely endorse that. But when it comes to people who are really sick, who have other medicines where there could be interactions, or they, you know, they have very vulnerable medical positions that they're in, a parent should know exactly what they're giving their child in an exact dose every single time, know where it's from, the same way you would expect not to go to the pharmacy and then to sort of give you a selection of rogue aspirins from God knows where, you know. So I think the problems are widespread.
Something that we've experienced as families, especially with Medcan, is when we publicise about fundraising for private prescriptions. There's one the other day, and there's comments saying, well, just grow your own. You know, it's just the law, it's simple, but it's not simple. Parents cannot grow their own. Parents cannot go to the illicit market, or shouldn't be going to the illicit market. Unfortunately, that is the reality. You know, here in the UK, we're doing an illicit report. That's going to be released in the early part next year, but already figures are in the hundreds of those that are accessing cannabis illicitly for seriously chronically ill children facing death. In situations like Tamsin's, that's not how it should be. So,
your own point, you know, again, like, I completely support anyone's right to do whatever they want, right? I really do in that respect, because I think this has been a patient-driven movement, and it's so unique in that sense, right? You know, I work now across the neuroscience kind of technology, that type of thing, and I have touch points with pharma, and, you know, I know the drug discovery process, right? And something is born inside a lab, it's tested, it's this, it goes through clinical trials, and then it is brought out, and then you might find aspirin again, like, it's good for headaches, but it's also good for something to do with your, you know, blood thinning or whatever, and so that happens after it's out. But this is a very unique situation in that patients are pushing doctors to do the testing that they've already seen with themselves, and that's fantastic, and I support it. But you can see that when you have very, very ill or challenging people, challenging conditions such as epilepsy, it's not just the case, as I said before, of having a consistent dose and knowing what's going on in it. It's also the practicalities. You know, this is a full-time job if you're a parent who's looking after a sick child and you're being asked to do the research. What's the right strain? Do you know how to grow it? Do you know how to process it? Like, it's not as simple as if I, who has, you know, I've got a dog, I don't have kids, I have a husband, I have no dependents, so yeah, I could probably give it a go, you know.
Yeah, my son's non-verbal, he can't walk, so we have we change his nappy, he's incontinent, so you know, 6 nappies every day, we have to feed him, we don't have time to be growing a plant, and that responsibility of producing his medicine, which is his seizure control, on top of all of our other responsibilities, it's insane. It shouldn't be that way, yeah. It shouldn't be
You have to have the responsibility. You know, I always found that it's bizarre in America when you sit down in front of the television and they're like, ask your doctor about this drug. And I'm like, why are you asking me to ask my doctor? That's, you know, one of the things in England is you put your faith in doctors. And I think this has been one of the crises around this, is that people don't feel like they can do that. And certainly it shouldn't be your responsibility. And that's what everyone is taking on the burden here, of having to convince the medical profession that this is something worth adopting. And in a way, that's what makes me sad, is that, you know, you're a full-time carer for your son, you've got enough on your plate as it is. Of course you should have access, but of course it shouldn't be your responsibility to also find other means of procuring it if the medical profession won't support your questioning as a parent, you know, and it's counterintuitive in so many ways.
The documentary as well, it really highlights in Tamsin's situation, she's under NHS care, so many people don't realise that, like, my son Charlie will eventually end up in care. I will lose guardianship. You can fight for it, but yeah, we won't be his legal, so we have no say in what medications he's prescribed. That will be down to the clinicians that are caring for him. So until cannabis is within the NHS, that will be taken away from him. That's happening now. There's children that we're supporting that are going through that process, and there are conversations where they're going into adult neurology, and they've been prescribed cannabis for many years now, and they're going, well, we can't give it to you because it's not within the NHS setting, it's not within that framework. So again, what we're trying to do is change that. But again, yeah, many people don't realise that that happens for many of us.
Yeah.
And I guess lastly is, did it highlight the desperate needs? So 600,000 people are diagnosed with epilepsy every year. A third of them will be refractory like Tamsin. for the past 40 years, regardless of what medications have come through, the numbers that remain refractory hasn't changed. It's still a third of all cases. Do you get a sense that the urgency that we need, I guess this isn't just about cannabis, it's about other forms of medications for epilepsy?
So epilepsy is an umbrella term given to a cluster of conditions that are all characterized by having multiple seizures. And so it becomes a little bit like a needle in a haystack. You know, it's a bit like saying you could treat all cancer exactly the same way, but perhaps with even, I don't want to say more complexity, but some, you know, they come at different times. You could have a traumatic brain injury, you could have, comorbidities, associated issues at the same time. And so it's so complex to treat. And I think the other thing about epilepsy, and again, what unites the stigma theme is that, you know, as we said, it's 50 million people worldwide, and yet it's such a highly stigmatized condition because I think it's quite terrifying for people to see, and they don't know what to do, and the people living with it carry the burden of that shame. And I think it also impacts diagnoses, and it impacts treatment options, and it burdens families. So there's an urgency on so many levels. The other thing with that is that actually treatments for epilepsy, it's rare that you have new treatments come along. And the other thing, and the last thing, which I think is probably the most important, particularly in the context that we are today, is that the side effects are absolutely debilitating of these drugs, because the human brain is a bizarre, complex thing, and you're trying to essentially take a sledgehammer type approach because it's so nuanced. So we don't have precision medicine that can look very specifically right now at someone's genome and their makeup, and that's what I'm working on right now, actually, is, how do we move towards precision medicine that takes into account the uniqueness of an individual, because that's what epilepsy is, so unique in every person. So the reason why cannabis is at least such a crucial option to try is because for so long, people with epilepsy have been treated by doctors who don't have epilepsy, and that happens over a lot of different conditions. It's not saying you have to have epilepsy to treat it, but what they just don't understand and can't understand is what that catch-22 is for patients of, do I live with the fear of having a seizure or potentially dying, or do I live with this insane amount of side effects that make me feel like a wildly different person to who I am, and I can't do this and I can't do that, and I can't sleep, and all the things that Chelsea listed. I'm starting to sound like her, but I think that's why this is urgent, is because there is a potential. It won't work for everyone, but it has worked for a lot of people, contrary to the neurologists.
Exactly, that point is when, as a parent, when we're looking at medications and then conversations with the clinicians, it's seizure control versus quality of life. There's medications my son's on which will cause him tunnel vision. So we're going to cause a disability, but we had to weigh up that he was having 120 seizures per day. And at that point, this was before cannabis, that was the only medication that seemed to take a little bit of it away. So as a parent, and even as a clinician, it's a really hard choice between, I'm going to cause him worse side effects, I'm going to potentially cause him tunnel vision, versus that, seizure control and the brain damage that was causing him. So again, I completely agree with cannabis. It is completely different. And again, going to your point, it's a personalised medicine. And I know there is research around biomarkers that's been happening in autism, looking at that individual, their biomarkers, their metabolism, and what, certain cannabinoids might not be suitable for a certain individual. And we're seeing that in children where they'll be prescribed one product. Unfortunately, some of these are not available. They then get prescribed another product, and they're not seeing the same impact. I've seen that in my son. So understanding it as a personalised medicine is really important.
Yeah, if I can say one thing to close up, I suppose, it's that I just have so much respect for you as parents. I have the utmost respect. You are phenomenal people. You become overnight experts in a condition. You know more than scientists, you know more than doctors. You try everything, all with the emotional burden of watching someone that you love, that you've produced, that is of you, suffering. And that was one of the difficulties, even being close to this film, was just having to witness that. And I can't even imagine what you go through, and I just have so much respect for what you guys are doing here. Yeah.